September 10, 1966, Quang Tri Province, South Vietnam. The jungle didn't breathe. It waited. In the smothering heat below Hill 484, a squad of U.S. Marines lay pinned in a shallow trench dug into red mud. The tree line just 600 meters away spat dust with every crack of a rifle, the unmistakable sonic snap of a Soviet-made SVD Dragunov. The VC sniper wasn't just shooting, he was hunting. And the Marines had nothing that could reach back. Private First Class, Raymond Henderson, just 21 years old, ducked as a round whistled past and exploded against the dirt wall behind him. The impact showered him in grit. His spotter, a skinny farm kid from Missouri named Langley, crawled beside him. 3 confirmed hits this morning, Langley said. Another 5 yesterday. And our M14s can't even tag him. The SVD had a range advantage. It was lighter, scoped, accurate beyond 800 meters. The Marines' standard issue M14, a reliable rifle, no doubt wasn't meant for counter-sniper precision at that distance. The man out there wasn't just a shooter. He was changing the tempo of the battlefield. Before we continue, if you're interested in the untold practical stories of World War II that nobody teaches, hit subscribe. These stories changed warfare, but never made it into official histories. Henderson wasn't just any Marine. He had grown up in Mississippi with a rifle slung over his shoulder before he ever had a school book. His uncle, a World War II vet, had taught him more about wind, mirage, and trigger control than any range instructor ever could. But none of that mattered if your weapon couldn't match the enemy's reach. They were dying in shouting distance of a sniper they couldn't touch. At 10:42 a.m., a radio call came in. Another fire team was hit trying to flank the hill. 1 KIA, 2 wounded. The company CO barked into the mic. "We need a counter-sniper solution now. Get eyes on that bastard. I want him gone." But everyone knew the truth. Nobody had a rifle capable of tagging that Dragunov from this distance. At least, not with the tools they had. Not yet. That night, Henderson didn't sleep. Instead, he sat cross-legged behind the sandbag perimeter, stripping down his M14 piece by piece. He held its 7.62mm bolt in one hand and the stripped barrel in the other. He didn't need a new rifle. He needed consistency. And maybe something to tame the vibration. In his pack was a tiny coil of steel baling wire, just thick enough to stabilize fence posts, light enough to disappear in weight. He had no blueprint, no manual, just instinct. He wrapped a loop of wire tight across the M14's wooden stock, just behind the gas tube. Then another loop farther down the barrel, creating subtle tension against the handguard, a kind of field expedient bedding system. It shouldn't have worked. But out here, nothing official ever did. The next morning, just before dawn, Henderson belly crawled to a ridge 200 meters forward of the platoon's position. Langley followed, lugging the spotting scope. They didn't speak. At 6:19 a.m., the Dragunov cracked again. Dirt jumped 5 feet to their right. "He's on the same line as yesterday," Langley whispered. "5th tree left of the termite mound. 620 meters. Henderson exhaled, lined up the iron sights, not even a scope, and waited. He could feel the wire's tension against his cheek as he settled into the stock. The recoil pulse would run cleaner now. No more barrel flex. No more wood shift from jungle humidity. He squeezed. The M14 barked once. Langley froze, peering through the scope, then smiled. "Hit, center chest. He's down." One shot. From a $275 rifle, with 75 cents of wire wrapped around its bones. Back at base, nobody believed it. So Henderson did it again. And again. By the end of the week, he'd dropped 4 more NVA snipers from 600+ meters, each with field-modified M14s, using the same tight wire trick. Word spread. A Marine Corps armor sergeant inspected the rig, then replicated it, then passed it on. Within months, dozens of Marine-designated marksmen had wired M14s in their hands, out shooting SVDs from jungle ridgelines to rice paddies. None of it was in a manual, but it saved lives and changed how U.S. snipers operated for the rest of the war. This is the story of one black Marine, $10.75 wire, and how battlefield necessity created a long-range revolution. Camp Carroll, Quang Tri Province, South Vietnam. The 13th of September 1966. The M14 was never meant to be a sniper rifle. It was born of compromise, part Garand, part M1 carbine, part wishful thinking. When the Pentagon adopted it in 1959, it was supposed to replace everything: the M1 Garand, the bar, the M3 grease gun, and even the M1000 918 squad automatic. But it didn't. It couldn't. The rifle was too long for jungle warfare, too heavy for patrols, and too unpredictable for precision fire. Yet in Vietnam, everything unofficial eventually became essential. After PFC Henderson's long-distance kill on Hill 484, whispers spread through the battalion like wildfire. Not about who he killed, but how. Not with a sniper rifle, with a wired-up Grunt's M14. At Camp Carroll, an armorer named Staff Sergeant Gene Klinger called it the dumbest brilliant thing I've ever seen. He held Henderson's rifle across his lap, eyes squinting behind grease-streaked glasses, fingers tracing the baling wire now wrapped in precise tension bands around the stock and barrel. It looked ridiculous. Field-rigged. Unauthorized. But the test groups didn't lie. "You're printing 2-inch MOA at 600 meters with iron sights?" he asked. Henderson nodded. "How?" "Stability. You tighten the stock tension. You reduce barrel whip. No shifting under heat or humidity. It's like giving the gun a spine." Klinger muttered something about Marines being half genius, half crazy, then made 3 copies of the design using leftover wire from a wrecked radio antenna mount. By the end of the week, there were 4 more wired M14s in the battalion. But Henderson wasn't done. He kept refining the method, adding rubber grommets from truck tires under the front sling mount to act as shock dampeners. He found that adjusting the tightness of the wire altered the harmonics of the barrel. In time, he could tune the rifle by feel. "It ain't a scope that makes a sniper," he'd tell Langley. "It's the shot you don't waste." They ran informal wire tuning tests behind the mess hall, with targets set out beyond 500 meters. One by one, patrol leaders came to watch, and in silence, round after round, the wired rifles hit steel. Officially, the Corps had no doctrine for a designated marksman in Vietnam. The only scoped sniper rifle was the M40, a Remington 700 bolt-action just entering limited service. Most units never even saw one. If you needed precision fire, you made your own tools or died without them. And in places like Quang Tri, precision meant survival. The NVA snipers weren't amateurs. They used range cards. They moved with spotters. They fired and relocated like phantoms. Standard issue patrol tactics weren't enough. The Marines needed something better, something repeatable, something that could even the fight at 600 meters. And that something was a rifle Henderson had rebuilt with scraps and instinct. Back home, Henderson would have never been allowed in the sniper program. His color, his background, his drawl, all reasons to be dismissed before he ever fired a shot. But here, in the red earth and shattered villages of Quang Tri, results talked. By the end of the month, his wired M14s were in every fire team in Charlie Company. Not official issue. But commanders looked the other way. Why? Because casualty rates on jungle patrols dropped 30%. In late September, during an ambush near the DMZ, a platoon walked into a kill zone crossfire from 2 NVA sniper nests. Radio calls screamed. Men went down. Chaos. Until Henderson, lying in the mud behind a termite mound, took aim. 2 shots. 2 kills. Both at over 650 meters. A medevac pilot later said, "That black Marine, the one with the weird rifle, he saved everyone. Never saw anything like it." By October, the brass started asking questions. Quietly. No press. No memos. Just back-channel curiosity. Who is this Henderson? And what the hell did he do to that rifle? They'd find out soon enough. Because what started as a baling wire trick was about to change Marine sniper doctrine forever. October 1966, outskirts of Khe Sanh Combat Base, South Vietnam. They called them ghosts, in the jungle. Not because they vanished, but because they saw you first. By mid-October, Henderson's success with his wired M14 wasn't a rumor anymore. It was a pattern. Kill after kill. Fire team after fire team reporting confirmed long-range takedowns using rifles no one had authorized, no one had designed, and no one could explain except the man who built them. The 3rd Marine Division didn't issue an order. It issued a suggestion. Put this Henderson guy in charge of training 6 others. Long-range interdiction. Designated marksman. Small unit. No uniforms. Just get results. It wasn't a promotion. It was an experiment. And the battlefield was the lab. They trained in the shadows of Khe-Sanh, where fog rolled off the hills like smoke from a napalm strike. Henderson picked his men himself, not based on rank or score, but instinct. Corporal Cheney from Detroit, quiet, cold-eyed, born behind a deer rifle. Private Alvarez from El Paso, scrawny, fast-talking, deadly at 800 meters. Sergeant Creep Lowry, the oldest of the bunch, former tunnel rat, nerves of stone. 2 other sharpshooters with steady hands and field scars. And Langley, his original spotter, now his right hand. They didn't call it a sniper school. That was too formal, too clean. This was war. This was about building a counter-sniper strike force before more Marines bled out in the mud. By now, Henderson had refined the wire trick into an exact science. Each rifle took 3 hours to tune. The stock was tensioned with 20-gauge wire in 2 bands. Rubber shims from cut boot soles were wedged under the receiver. The trigger pull was honed using emery cloth and spent brass as feeler gauges. The rifles weren't pretty, but they printed 1.5 MOA groups at 700 meters, and with jungle humidity, that was nearly miraculous. And none of it cost the government more than a couple feet of wire and 5 hours of one man's brain. They deployed without fanfare. No patches, no announcements. Their mission was simple: hunt the hunters. First op, Route 9, 2 miles from the Laotian border. Marines had lost 3 patrols in a week to sniper fire from a dense ridgeline. Henderson's Phantom platoon humped into position under moonlight, digging in at 0400. At 0613, the Dragunov cracked. Too late. Alvarez dropped the NVA spotter before the echo faded. Cheney took the shooter through the scope. Henderson never fired. 2 confirmed, 1 retreating. No Marines lost. The next morning, a Bravo Company lieutenant radioed. Who the hell are these guys? The answer came 3 days later when the company CP was briefed. Unofficial Marine designated marksman unit. Temporary. Results. Driven. They weren't ghosts anymore. They were precision fire incarnate. By late October, they had a new name whispered over field radios. The Wiremen. A joke, at first, until recon teams started requesting them by call sign. Until casualty reports on sniper missions dropped by 40%. Until the NVA started leaving behind dead snipers with Dragunov's untouched rifles too sacred to abandon unless something was seriously wrong. Something was. American M14s were outranging Soviet SVDs. Consistently. Without scopes. Without doctrine. Just wire and will. But success breeds attention. And attention, in the military, can kill innovation faster than bullets. By November, word reached Da Nang. An inspector from MACV was dispatched to evaluate non-standard battlefield modifications. Translation: shut it down before it embarrassed the chain of command. They had no idea what they were walking into. Because Henderson and the Wiremen weren't just a field oddity anymore. They were rewriting the rules of jungle warfare. And soon, their little outlaw unit would be forced to prove themselves not in secret, but under the full scrutiny of a command that never wanted them to exist in the first place. The 2nd of November 1966, Khe-Sanh Airstrip, South Vietnam. The bird landed with a hiss of brakes and a dust storm that coated everything in tan. Out stepped Colonel Nathaniel Breck, staff officer from MACV's Inspectorate Division, wearing crisp fatigues that hadn't seen a single leech, bullet, or foot of jungle. He wasn't here to fight. He was here to investigate. And his target wasn't the enemy. It was Henderson's unit. Unregulated weapons modification. Unauthorized sniper training. Unrecorded kills. No formal logbooks. No ordnance approval. Breck barked as he briefed the battalion CO. To the wireman, he was a walking checklist. A man who thought war was a spreadsheet. And worse, he had orders to suspend all unauthorized weapons until reviewed. That meant one thing: shut down the wire rifles. Henderson didn't argue. He listened quietly as Breck inspected his M14 like it was a defective toaster. The colonel scribbled notes. Wire bracing. Altered barrel harmonics. This isn't regulation. You've compromised the structural integrity. Henderson just stared, unmoving. We've compromised the enemy's skulls, sir, he said. Maybe that counts. Breck wasn't impressed. He ordered every modified M14 collected, locked away, replaced with unaltered standard rifles. You want to shoot long range? He said. Use the new M40s bolt action, scope, precision, by the book. Problem was, they had only 2 M40s, no spare scopes, no experience with them. And the jungle didn't wait for logistics. 3 days later, the NVA struck. North of Langvay, a patrol from 2nd Platoon was ambushed on a ridgeline known as Whispering Knoll. Radio reports came in fragmented. Half the patrol pinned. 2 dead. A sniper somewhere on the high ground picking off wounded. The CO turned to Breck. Your rifles are locked up. Your rules. You get 'em out. Breck hesitated. Then someone else spoke. Henderson. Sir, I'll go. Give me 5 men. Our wire rifles. The CO nodded. Breck objected. The CO cut him off. You can write me up. But if they die up there, that's your paperwork's fault. At 1,500 hours, Henderson's team moved fast and low, boots silent on moss and root. They reached the lower slope by 1600. Crawled. Waited. SVDs working a reverse slope. Sound bounces throwing off direction, Langley whispered, scanning through a spotting scope. Range, 670 meters. Henderson opened the crate Breck had padlocked. Inside was his rifle, the first, still wrapped with worn wire and a strip of black tape that held the rubber shim under tension. 1 shot, he said. Keep heads down. He exhaled. Tuned the rifle on instinct. Wind, 4 knots east. Mirage, shimmer low. Trigger set. Muzzle just above the fern line. He fired. Langley said nothing for a moment. Then, you hit his optics, through the scope. Confirmet kill. Second shot dropped the spotter as he stood to run. By 1700, the pin patrol was extracted. 0 further casualties. The next morning, Breck stood in front of Henderson and said 4 words. Show me the method. They spent the next 48 hours in a bombed-out hut, turned classroom. Henderson taught him everything. How to wrap the wire with consistent torque, where to brace the stock to prevent vibration, how to field test barrel harmonics, using nothing but a sling and a rock. Breck listened, took notes, and for the first time, stopped talking. A week later, MACV Command quietly issued a memo. Field. Expedient tuning modifications to the M14 are hereby authorized for designated marksmen in forward units, pending documentation. Unofficially, it was called Henderson's Fix. Evan Breck admitted, it costs under $1, but it changes the game. That month, 8 battalions across I Corps began modifying their own M14s using Henderson's specs. The war hadn't changed, but now the rifles had. Because one Black Marine had shown them all that the battlefield doesn't wait for bureaucracy and innovation doesn't come from a lab. It comes from necessity, and from refusing to accept that outgunned means outmatched. The 22nd of November 1966 Firebase Fuller, near the DMZ. The operation was called Iron Lance. Another textbook sweep near the Laotian border. Another search and destroy mission pushed by HQ. Another hill. Another map coordinate. Another trap. But this time, the NVA was ready. Hill 802 looked like every other jungle rise in Quang Tri, steep, soaked, and silent. It was also laced with tripwires, booby traps, and a sniper team with overlapping kill zones. By 0700 hours, 1st Platoon was moving up the slope. At 0716, the first shot cracked. A Marine dropped mid-stride. No shout, no warning, just gone. The call went out: sniper contact. Command assumed it was one shooter. Standard. They were wrong. There were six. Six NVA snipers, each armed with SVD Dragunovs, cross-covered on a hill that bent westward into the Sunday. Their tactics were brutal. Fire once, relocate, switch sectors. And each shot was precise. One squad was already pinned behind a boulder. Another was bleeding out behind fallen bamboo. It should have been a slaughter. Until the wireman got the call. At Firebase Fuller, Henderson had been cleaning his rifle when the radio came alive. Contact on Hill 802. Multiple shooters. Platoon pinned. Request. Wireman. ASAP. There was no hesitation. Within minutes, 5 of them were in the bush. Henderson, Langley, Cheney, Alvarez, and Lowry. Each carried a wired M14. No scopes, no glory. Just silent confidence. They moved fast, low, uphill. By 0748, they reached a secondary ridge overlooking the hill. Langley scanned through binocs. They're spaced, 6 of them. One up the tree line, one under that outcropping. I see 3 muzzle positions. Henderson's voice was calm. We go in sequence, 1 shot each. Reset. 1 more pass. What followed was a choreographed ghost dance. Cheney took the first shot, a barked crack that dropped a sniper 580 meters away. Then Alvarez, shifting slightly downhill, caught a flash of movement behind a log. 1 tap, 1 dead. Langley spotted a shimmer in the Sunday. Henderson braced his rifle against a root. 3rd kill, Langley whispered. Dead center. Through the side of the head. By 0820, 5 enemy snipers were down. The last one fled. The hill went silent. The Marines below couldn't believe it. We didn't even hear them fire, one said. Just the enemy dropping. No wounded Marines died that day. No more shots came from the jungle. Hill 802, the ambush slope, was taken by 0930. When the platoon regrouped at the base of the hill, the squad leader approached Henderson. You boys, you weren't just shooting. You were hunting. Henderson looked down at his wired-up rifle, then back at the man. They brought the distance game. We brought it further. A photographer embedded with the unit snapped a picture. 5 Marines in mud-caked fatigues, seated in a semicircle, rifles resting across their knees. Not one scope in sight. Just coils of metal wire glinting in the Sunday. That photo never made it to the newspapers. But it circulated through every forward command post in I Corps. The message was clear. You want Hill 802? You better bring the wiremen. That night, over bitter coffee and cigarette smoke, Langley said what nobody had yet dared to speak aloud. You realize what we did today? 6 enemy snipers. Outranged. Outgunned. With what the Corps calls outdated junk. Henderson didn't respond. He just wiped down the wire that kept his barrel true, muttered something about good tension today, and packed his kit. The war wasn't over. But today, it had bent. And it bent around $0.75 worth of wire, and one man's refusal to miss. December 1966 near Lao Bao, along the Ho Chi Minh Trail. The rifle had no markings, no serial number, no unit engraving. But the scope told them everything. It was a PSO-1, the prized Soviet optic mounted on the SVD Dragunov razor clear, range calibrated, and issued only to elite marksmen trained by advisors from Moscow. The body it came from was still warm. The man had camouflage netting stitched to his uniform, a telltale sign of NVA special marksmanship teams. But the real giveaway was the small leather notebook tucked inside his blouse. It held kill tallies and notes in Cyrillic. Langley turned the pages carefully. Diagrams, shooting angles, wind tables. One phrase, repeated near the bottom, underlined. Американский отряд призраков, точность опасная. American Ghost Unit, dangerous accuracy. That's when they knew. The Soviets knew about the wiremen. For months, U.S. command had whispered about the presence of advisors. Everyone knew Soviet and Chinese personnel were aiding North Vietnam behind the scenes. But this was different. This wasn't supply. This was counter-tactics. They were studying the wiremen, charting kill patterns, ranges, weapon signatures. And worse, they were trying to build counters. Within 2 weeks, something changed on the battlefield. Enemy snipers stopped firing from fixed positions. Decoys started showing up dummies in trees, flash triggers on logs. Rifles were silenced, using improvised suppressors. And enemy kill zones began to appear just outside the effective range of standard M14s. Langley noticed first. They're stretching the fight, pushing us back. They want to force misses. Cheney grimaced. That or bait us into shooting too early, give away our position. Henderson nodded. Quiet. Focused. Then we stretch further. That night, he began sketching a new solution on a folded MRE box. It looked simple. 2 lines of tension, a third across the receiver. Weighted bolts welded to a stiffened sling mount. Langley raised an eyebrow. You building a violin or a weapon? Both, Henderson replied. Accuracy's a song. You just gotta tune it. He called it the tension loop. A wire rig that stabilized barrel harmonics through 3 anchor points instead of 2. It wasn't doctrine. It wasn't pretty. But the next morning, a test at 780 meters put 5 shots into a pie plate. No scope, no rest, just raw tension. Word spread. Soon, entire recon units were asking for Henderson loop kits. Forward armorers began cutting sections of wire from broken radio packs just to feed demand. And Mac V, once skeptical, now printed his diagrams in an unofficial field manual titled Rifle Accuracy Under Jungle Conditions. Expedient Techniques for Forward Marksmen. Henderson's name wasn't on the cover, but every Marine in country knew whose hands had drawn those lines. But as they adapted, so did the enemy. On December 14th, near the Ban Karai Pass, an American forward observer intercepted a coded enemy message. It referenced ghost shooters and called for deployment of Viet Cong hunter sniper teams trained using Soviet guerrilla sniper doctrine from the Eastern Front. These weren't just riflemen, they were counter-snipers, and their only job was to eliminate the wiremen. 3 days later, Lowry didn't return from a solo overwatch. His body was found with a single shot through the left eye SVD round. Clean. Professional. It broke them. Henderson didn't speak for hours. Just rewound his wire. Recut the tension loop. Reset the barrel. And then he said one word. We hunt. That's when the mission changed. They weren't just a support unit anymore. They were a strategic threat, a legend, a problem the Soviets couldn't explain and the NVA couldn't kill fast enough. The jungle had become a chessboard, and Henderson's $0.75 invention? It wasn't a trick anymore. It was a doctrine, a declaration, that American rifles could still outrange Moscow steel, even if they had to be rebuilt with wire, sweat, and stubbornness. December 21, 1966, Hill 947, Western Guangxi Province. The wind shifted just before dawn, cold, dry, blowing downhill from Laos. Perfect for a long shot, perfect for a kill. Staff Sergeant Henderson lay flat on the rocky ledge, his elbows dug into the dirt. To his right, Langley scanned the valley through binoculars, murmuring coordinates. Below them, 1,000 yards across a jungle ravine, sat an enemy sniper blind. And inside it, they knew, was the man who had killed Lowry. This wasn't another ghost in the trees. This was a professional, trained by Soviet doctrine and confirmed by ballistic signatures. 3 Americans had died in the last 10 days. Each shot came from the same weapon, same range, same precision. Henderson called him the Red Whisper. The plan was brutal in its simplicity. Wait until sunrise. Force movement with a dummy patrol in the valley. Defy. Locate flash. Return 1 clean shot. But at 1,000 yards, with no scope, no rangefinder, and jungle haze rising from the underbrush, the margin for error was less than a hair's width. Langley whispered, "You sure the wire will hold?" Henderson didn't blink. "I tensioned it with a bayonet and tree bark. It's tight." He had modified the loop again, a dual-laced bracing system around the forestock, anchored to a rear sling swivel and counterbalanced by a crushed ration can under the handguard. It was a rifle tuned like a violin. Improvised, ugly, precise. At 0628, the bait patrol moved through the gully. At 0633, the Red Whisper took the shot. Crack. A Marine in the patrol staggered wounded, not killed and dropped behind a log. Langley caught the muzzle flash. Left rise, third ridge. 1,015 yards. 1 meter below ridgeline. Left of termite mound. Henderson adjusted. Exhaled. Held the front post just a hair high. Let the tension settle. Felt the wire flex not bend, but harmonize. Then squeezed. The silence after the shot was heavier than the shot itself. 10 seconds. 15. Langley. Hit. I think he dropped. But Henderson wasn't done. He reached into his pack and pulled out a second magazine, this one hand-loaded with match-grade rounds pulled from confiscated VC supplies. He fired again, then again. Not for the kill, he said. For the silence. When the patrol reached the enemy blind, they found 2 bodies. The sniper, dead shot clean through the mouth, and his spotter killed by a follow-up round to the chest. The Dragunov lay in the mud, cracked through the receiver. The Soviet optic was shattered. Back at base, the rifle Henderson used his wired-up M14 was laid across a table for inspection. This thing shouldn't shoot past 600, the ordnance officer muttered. And yet it just killed 2 men at 1,000. Henderson looked at the officer. Then maybe the rifle didn't. Maybe it was the wire. Word spread fast. Within days, rumors flooded other fire bases. That a black Marine had outdueled a Soviet sniper. That he'd done it with no scope, just braced wire and intuition. That the Americans had finally turned the jungle into their range. They weren't dismissed as myths anymore. Now, even the brass wanted in. One Macvo colonel sent a request. Demonstrate technique for future scout sniper school. Henderson refused. We're still in the game, he said, and I don't teach tricks to men I can't bleed with. But not all attention was welcome. 2 weeks later, Langley intercepted radio chatter on a captured NVA frequency. Priority target. Henderson unit. Elimination recommended. Ghost Squad disrupts long-range battlefield control. They weren't hunting just snipers anymore. Now the enemy was hunting them. The 4th of January 1967, Hill 331, Ashau Valley. The jungle was too quiet. Staff Sergeant Henderson froze mid-step. His boots sank slightly into the damp moss covering the trail, but he didn't move further. He just raised a closed fist. Langley and Cheney halted behind him. No words, no questions, just silence. It was supposed to be a routine flank patrol, a 3-man recon loop west of Hill 331, clearing terrain for an incoming company. But as they neared the bend in the trail, everything felt wrong. Too few birds. No monkey chatter. No wind. Even the leaves looked stiff, as if holding their breath. Langley edged forward, whispered, "LZ's wrong. Trail's too clean." Cheney scanned the tree line. No boot prints. Not even ours. That's when Henderson saw it, a faint wire just barely above the dirt, glinting in the low Sunday. Booby trap. He dropped to his belly and crawled. A second wire, then a third. The kill zone was massive. They were walking into a shaped ambush, likely set by Viet Cong counter-sniper teams, the same units trained with Soviet tactics, now ordered to destroy Henderson's ghost unit. This wasn't random. It was personal. Henderson made the call. Backtrack, double time. Radio goes cold until we're past that ridge. But as they turned, the jungle lit up. AK fire, controlled bursts, 2 flanks, high ground. Langley dove left, rolling behind a fallen tree. Cheney dropped flat. Henderson scrambled back and raised his M14, the wired rifle. The jungle had come alive, and they were caught in the jaws of an ambush. The first VC sniper round cracked over Langley's head. He spotted the muzzle flash on a vine-covered ledge, 340 meters. No time, no scope, no rest. Henderson was already adjusting, kneeling, elbow braced against a tree root. Wire taut, barrel stabilized. Uphill flash, Langley called. Left of the termite mound. Crack. 1 shot. Then silence. Henderson hit him through the leaf cover, straight through the optic lens. The spotter never returned fire. But the main ambush team was closing in 8, maybe 10 VC with SKSs and AKs, circling wide. Cheney shouted, firing suppressive bursts from his M14. "They're herding us downhill." That's when Henderson spotted it, a dry riverbed below, 600 yards out. If they made it there, they'd break sight lines, maybe even circle back. "Run for the creek," he ordered. "I'll cover." Cheney and Langley bolted through the brush, rounds snapping overhead. Henderson knelt in the open, breathing slowly. He fired once, twice. Each shot not just a threat, a delay. At 500 yards, one VC went down. At 480, another. The wire stayed tight. The rifle stayed true. The team made the riverbed. They circled wide. And by 1300 hours, they'd re-emerged 800 yards north behind the ambush zone. Now, it was their turn. Langley glassed the ridge. Found them. 4 VCs still in position, thinking the ghosts had been swallowed by the jungle. "You want 'em?" Langley asked. Henderson nodded. "Dial in. 1 each. Let's end it." The wire sang again. 4 shots. 4 hits. The ambush failed. Back at Firebase Dakota, the debrief was short. Intelligence confirmed it. The VC unit was specifically trained to counter Henderson's team. They carried Soviet maps, marking known ghost unit patrol routes. A red circle was drawn around Hill 331. The captain, reading the report, just stared. "You're not just a sniper squad anymore," he said. "You're a myth." That night, Henderson sat under the shelter tarp, unwinding his tension wire. Langley asked, "Why do you always retighten it by hand?" Henderson smiled faintly. "Because wire doesn't lie. It hums or it doesn't. Like instinct, like a battlefield." And then he added quietly, "They're adapting, but we're still here." He ran his thumb along the cool wire. "And we still reach farther." The 9th of January 1967, Da Nang Air Base, MACV Command Center. The transport chopper kicked up a storm of red dust as it settled onto the tarmac. Henderson stepped out, ducking instinctively under the rotors, his wired M14 slung low across his back like a relic. He wasn't in jungle fatigues now. The Marines had issued him fresh utilities, starch-creased, unscuffed. He looked like a recruiting poster, if not for the eyes. Inside the MACV compound, cold air hit him like a slap. Clean, controlled. He hated it. This wasn't his world. This was the war behind the war, where men in ribbons signed off on battles they'd never hear, where officers wore pistols in air-conditioned offices and called it command. And now, one of those men, Brigadier General Harlan J. Trevors, wanted to meet the ghost with the wired rifle. Trevors didn't waste time. "I've read the after-action reports. Hill 802. The sniper duel. The ambush at Hill 331. Impressive work, Sergeant." Henderson nodded, arms crossed. The general motioned to a display case on the wall, captured AKs, VC flags, a shattered Dragunov optic behind glass. "Your unit has confirmed 41 enemy kills since October. No casualties. You've changed doctrine, Sergeant." Henderson replied evenly. "I fixed rifles. The enemy did the rest." Trevors smiled, thin and practiced. "I want to formalize your tactics. Start a long-range interdiction school. Base it here, at Da Nang. You'll be commissioned, promoted. Lead the next wave of Marine snipers." It was everything a career soldier should want. Rank, authority, legacy. But Henderson didn't answer right away. He stared at a photo on the wall, young Marines boarding a Huey, helmets low, M14s slung. He could see their faces. Lowry, Cheney, Alvarez, Langley. Ghosts with rifles held together by wire, sweat, and stubbornness. "I didn't come here to be a schoolteacher, sir. I came here because the men out there are dying. Because nobody believed a $0.75 fix could save their lives." Trevors leaned forward. "But that's the point. We need those fixes. Institutionalize them. Teach them. Standardize them." Henderson's reply came quiet but sharp. "The moment it's standard, it stops being a miracle. The wire only works because no one expects it to." The general studied him. "You're refusing a direct commission?" "I'm refusing to leave my rifle in a glass box." Trevors sat back, exhaled. "Then what do you want?" Henderson didn't hesitate. "More wire, more ammo, and 2 new rifles." I'm training 2 more. He walked out of that office, a staff sergeant. Same rank, same gear, same mission. But now the myth had teeth. MACV quietly approved a supply requisition. 1,000 feet of communication wire. 400 rounds of M14 match ammo. 2 unmodified M14s. 6 days of rations and jungle boots. The paperwork listed it under field testing counter-sniper operations. But in reality, it was a bet. A gamble that one man's brain, a roll of stolen wire, and battlefield rage could still outthink Soviet doctrine. Back at Firebase Dakota, Langley met him on the pad. "So, you a general now?" Henderson just grinned. "Nah, just a man with more wire." They unpacked the new rifles that night. Raw, uncut, heavy. Henderson ran his fingers along the stocks, measuring tension points, listening to the flex of the grain. Then, slowly, he began to wire them. No ceremony. No speech. Just 2 more weapons that weren't supposed to matter. Until they did. March 1967, Guangxi Province, near Laos border. The jungle hadn't changed. It still dripped after the rain. Still echoed with the distant thump of mortars. Still smelled of cordite, sweat, and rotting leaves. But something in the way the younger Marines moved tighter formations, lower postures, sharper eyes suggested the ghost stories had begun to spread. They weren't just patrolling now. They were hunting, and they were doing it with wire-bound rifles. Henderson squatted beneath a palm frond, lacing a tension wire around the stock of a trainee's M14. The kid's name was Reeves, barely 19, quiet, eyes that hadn't blinked since stepping off the bird. "Wire tight?" Henderson asked. "Singeing like piano string stuff." Henderson nodded. He held up the rifle and let the jungle breeze strum the wire ever so faintly. "When you feel that hum, don't aim, just trust. Rifle tell you where it wants to go." Reeves said nothing, but his hands were steady. That was enough. By now, there were 6 wired rifles circulating through the AO. 2 were in the hands of Henderson's original unit. 2 were passed to recon snipers with 1st Marine Division. 1 was rumored to have made a confirmed kill at 1,200 yards through fog, and 1 was lost, left buried under a false rock cairn when its owner bled out on Hill 442. No ceremony, just wire in the mud. The jungle kept its debts. In February, Stars and Stripes ran a tiny story. Marine sharpshooters innovate jungle sniper doctrine with modified M14s. No names, no specifics, just an acknowledgement. It didn't matter. The real legacy wasn't ink. It was how the enemy started dying at distances they thought were safe. It was the confusion in NVA intercepts. American rifles, longer range, unseen shooters. It was the shift in Soviet training manuals, updated to account for asymmetric long-range patrols from unknown units. One day, Langley found Henderson sitting alone, rifle across his lap, tightening the tension on a new wire loop. "You think this'll last after we're gone?" Henderson looked at the knot, pulled it tight, felt the stock groan, just slightly. "No, a beat. But maybe that's the point." Langley raised an eyebrow. "How you figure?" "Because it's not about the wire or the rifle. It's about the idea that someone, somewhere, when no one gives a damn, will still look at a failing piece of gear and say, 'No, I can make this better.'" In April, Henderson's unit rotated out. He left no formal record, no training program, no blueprint. But when a replacement lieutenant arrived, the armorer handed him a crate. Inside, 1 M14 with wire already strung, a laminated card with a single phrase, "Trust the hum." Years later, in a dusty museum case in Quantico, someone found one of the rifles. No markings, no scope, just a loop of communication wire corroded but still firm. A placard beneath it read, "Field, modified M14 Vietnam, 1967. Exact origin unknown. Believed to have contributed to sniper innovation doctrine under fire. But to the men who carried it, it wasn't a doctrine. It was a lifeline. Wired, worn, whispered into myth.